The Ukrainian counterattack the world has been waiting for since the start of spring has failed. Russia has defeated every Ukrainian effort to penetrate its lines, and Western Leopard 2 tanks and American Bradleys have all been completely destroyed. At least that's according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, who maintains the highest ethical standards and thus has no reason to lie. We would politely like to disagree with their assessment of the ongoing counterattack in our first update of the ongoing fighting. Shaping operations have been ongoing in preparation of the actual attack since as of at least a month ago, when Britain announced that it had delivered Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine just minutes after they started raining down on Russian heads. Shaping operations helped set the stage for the attack, and by all accounts caught the Russians completely by surprise, as they were not expecting nor prepared for the delivery of the Storm Shadow long-range cruise missiles. These missiles are low-observable, subsonic weapons who fly very close to the ground to evade Russian radar. This significantly limits the amount of warning time an air defense battery receives of an incoming volley, and thus makes them more difficult to intercept. While Russia has taken significant preparations to move its supply depots and command and control nodes out of the range of American HIMARS, it took no such preparations to safeguard against attack by weapons such as Storm Shadow. Russia's claimed to shoot down most, if not all, of the British-supplied Storm Shadows, and yet for several weeks now, Russian targets far in the rear areas have been spontaneously exploding. In a recent attack using Storm Shadow missiles, Chechen senior military commander and a member of the Russian parliament, Adam Delimkhanov, was rumored to have been killed or at least injured. Chechen dictator Ramzan Kadyrov, however, refuted the rumors, despite previously posting on Telegram that he'd been unable to contact Delimkhanov after the attack. Now, as of June 14, Kadyrov claims that Delimkhanov is alive and well, offering a photo of him and Delimkhanov together at some unknown point in the past as proof. If by alive and well, Kadyrov means Delimkhanov is alive and well in Kadyrov's cherished memories, then he's probably right. But the physical well-being of Delimkhanov at the present on this specific temporal timeline remains a mystery. Other Russian parliamentary members also claim that Delimkhanov is alive and well, yet to date nobody has offered any proof, and there's not a single shred of credibility left within the government of the Russian Federation. The long-range attacks seem to have now been focused on disrupting Russia's mobile reserves. Russia's proven it's about as adept at fighting a war as the average toddler, but even it recognizes that you can't concentrate all your forces along a single line of defense. If you were to do so, you would allow your opponent to simply overwhelm you with numbers at one single point of penetration. Instead, modern militaries create a line of defense and, behind it, a force of mobile reserves. The defensive line is responsible for slowing the attacker down, buying enough time for the mobile reserves to move in and shore up the defense. Now it appears Ukraine is seeking to disrupt Russia's ability to maneuver its mobile reserves. HIMARS and Storm Shadow strikes have taken out bridges, roads, and railways, while continuing to target Russian supply depots and command posts when discovered. Freezing or even just slowing down Russia's mobile reserves will allow Ukraine to exploit a penetration and sweep into the flanks of their defensive line, decimating them in rear attack. For historical context, the lack of a swift dedication of their mobile reserves doomed the Nazis in World War II during the D-Day invasions, as the Allies penetrated the coastal defenses and exploited breakthroughs to create a beachhead. While shaping operations are ongoing, Ukraine is now in the starting phases of the ground action part of the counterattack. Yet it's not the battle we've all been expecting for nearly a year. Instead, Ukraine is engaging in a series of attacks known as reconnaissance in force. While some Western equipment has been sighted on the front lines, there's no sign as of June 14th of the large concentrations of Western tanks and IFVs that make up some of Ukraine's reserve battalions. This means that Ukraine has yet to commit fully to the counterattack, with some estimates placing half of Ukraine's battalions, specially trained in the West, still in a reserve state. Instead, Ukraine's been launching a large-scale probing of Russian defenses, attacking with smaller units and less heavy equipment. These recon and force maneuvers are meant to map out Russian defense and press them without being decisively engaged. The goal is to see where the Russian line is the weakest so that it can be immediately exploited by a massed concentration of firepower kept in reserve. Right now, across eastern Ukraine, all the fighting of the last week has been nothing but thunder before the lightning storm. Here we have to make special note, because while Western equipment has not been dedicated to the fight en masse, there are still some Western tanks and IFVs in the current fighting. We have confirmed losses of American Bradley and German Leopard 2 tanks, most famously with up to 4 Leopard 2s lost in an unfortunate ambush near the front lines at the very start of the ground offensive. This was a tragic day for Ukraine, as the small armored column made its way to the front line and fell right into a Russian artillery ambush. This incident is believed to have been the result of poor leadership on the ground implementing bad doctrine. Perhaps the commander of the assault unit felt that his forces were safe enough in the rear, but whatever his reasoning, he failed to implement proper spacing between vehicles. Thus, when spotted by a Russian drone, the artillery ambush destroyed many of the tightly packed vehicles, who couldn't maneuver to safety fast enough. It was a senseless and catastrophic loss of life, and of very scarce Western main battle tanks and IFVs. It was also a propaganda victory for Russia, who immediately shared the footage of the ambush across social media. Even more cleverly, though, Russia used different angles of the same footage to make it seem as if it had destroyed dozens of Western tanks and IFVs in an attempt to boost its own morale and lower the morale of Western supporters, who might see the losses as a sign that providing equipment to Ukraine is a waste of resources. In fact, media has been largely dominated by footage from Russian sources of Ukrainian losses, which is creating a false narrative that supports the Russian Ministry of Defense's claims that the counteroffensive is a failure. What's actually going on is that Ukraine is still operating under a strict veil of secrecy, with a social media blackout on most of the fighting. This information vacuum is critical for Ukraine to maintain operational security and surprise Russian defenders when it chooses to fully commit its reserves in a breakthrough attack. However, it does cede the propaganda initiative to Moscow, who is exploiting it for maximum effect. What we do know is that losses in equipment are expected in any fighting, but especially in offensive operations. The fall offensive that swept away so much of Russia's military was one of the most stunning military operations since the US's defeat of Iraq's regular forces in the Second Iraq War. However, it also resulted in the loss of hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles for Ukraine, though to be fair, Russia was kind enough to abandon nearly just as many in its panicked retreat, thus replenishing Ukraine's stockpile. We also know that Ukraine is achieving limited success in its ongoing assaults, regaining ground on the flanks of Bakhmut and across the entire Eastern Front. The Ukrainian government has officially confirmed the liberation of dozens of smaller villages, but there is yet to be a massive breakthrough across any part of the front. This is actually bad news for Russia, because it means that even now it is steadily losing ground despite Ukraine not fully committing its reserves. These probing attacks are likely part of a strategy to not just probe Russia's defense for weak points, but to confuse its mobile reserves. Attacking across a wide front, Russia must maintain its reserves in centralized locations from which they can quickly respond to any breakthrough. But like Britain in the latter part of World War I, Ukraine is launching small attacks simultaneously across the entire front, confusing Russian predictions on where the main attack will come. To make matters worse, Ukraine continues to launch attacks on Russia's mobile reserves and transport infrastructure with long-range precision weapons. Right now, it's generally agreed that Ukraine is feeling for an opening, and by all accounts is ready to very quickly exploit it while slowing down Russia's ability to commit reserves. However, it's not all peaches and cream for Ukraine either. Ukraine lacks the ability to challenge Russia in the air, and has lacked precision long-range weapons until only recently. This means it's been able to do little to disrupt Russia's 6 months-long buildup of defensive fortifications. Now Ukraine faces some of the most formidable defenses seen in Europe since the Second World War, with multiple lines of defense all protected by vast minefields, infantry trenches, bunkers, and tank obstacles. For the US, this would present little challenge, as its air supremacy and long-range strike ability allows it to fix and hammer defenders into oblivion while engineering vehicles cleared a path. Anyone stupid enough to duck their head out and take a shot at a mine-clearing vehicle would likely find a precision artillery shell landing right on top of their head. But Ukraine lacks any form of air supremacy or really any air support at all over the front, and due to Western hesitation at providing weapons, is severely limited in its ability to deliver overwhelming amounts of precision fire. The US and allies have provided Ukraine with the required engineering vehicles, but it'll be a slow and hard fight against a well-entrenched enemy. This is why it'll be extremely critical for Ukraine to achieve a breakthrough and exploit it quickly, getting into the Russian rear areas and behind the lines of defense. In a small scale, it's achieving exactly that. The Ukrainians have taken lessons from the US playbook, specifically America's 2003 Thunder runs into Baghdad that completely disrupted the Iraqi defense and turned what could have been a months-long siege into a relatively easy battle for the American military. In April 2003, Colonel Eric Schwartz had an idea. He assembled an assault force of 29 Abrams tanks, 14 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, and a handful of M113 armored personnel carriers. The small force rolled straight into the heart of Baghdad and through Iraqi defensive lines, moving at a leisurely pace of only 8 miles an hour. The assault completely disrupted Iraq's defenders, who were surprised at the brazenness of the assault. This first Thunder Run, as it would come to be known, moved slowly and under strict discipline. The vehicles were not to stop for anything save for helping rescue a damaged or disabled vehicle. Each vehicle had an assigned field of fire and would leverage American advantages in accuracy and precision while on the move for maximum effect. The attack resulted in a stunning victory with estimated hundreds of casualties on the Iraqi side and only a single American KIA. A second Thunder run with a much larger force 2 days later resulted in greater casualties for the US, but was met with similar stunning success and completely disrupted Iraqi defenses, allowing follow-on forces to overwhelm Baghdad's defenders. Now Ukraine is employing its own Thunder runs, albeit at a smaller scale. The Ukrainian 35th Marine Brigade has become a significant headache to the Russian military as it continues a week-long Thunder Run operation along the Mokryali River and penetrating as deep as the now liberated Makarivka, southwest of Donetsk. The 35th is only made up of about 2,000 soldiers and equipped with a few dozen British Mastiff or Turkish Kirpi armored tanks, along with an estimated 10 T-80 tanks. Despite being so lightly armed, the Ukrainian 35th has found great success by exploiting its own version of shock and awe. With a T-80 tank in the lead, the formation, mostly made up of armored trucks, blasts its way along and through Russian lines, only stopping to destroy bunkers or clear the immediate area. The swift ongoing attack moves too quickly for Russian defenders to coordinate and defend against, and exploits Russia's lack of command and control and initiative amongst its military members. With a heavy top-down command structure, few NCOs, and zero emphasis on individual initiative, Ukraine's Thunder runs are moving too quickly for Russian defenses to adjust. The 35th, however, is attacking along one of Russia's less fortified lines, while battles in better protected areas aren't going as well for the Ukrainians. The 33rd Mechanized and 47th Assault Brigade have suffered heavy losses in an attack south of Mala Tokmachka. 5 of the combined forces' engineering vehicles and 3 of its 6 Leopard 2s have been confirmed destroyed. To blame are extremely dense minefields and the Russian Air Force, which for once is actually doing its job properly and hammering the Ukrainian assault. Without air cover and few long-range frontline air defenses, the Ukrainian attack was thwarted, putting even more emphasis on the need for Ukraine to receive Western jets if it's to truly win this war of aggression. The key takeaway from what we now know of the limited information space is that while the counteroffensive operations have begun, Ukraine has yet to commit decisively to any part of the front. Thus, while losses of men and Western equipment can be demoralizing to supporters of Ukraine, it's important to remember that the nation still maintains a sizable force held in reserve. It's also important to remember that losses are expected during assault operations, and the effort to support Ukraine was never about a one-time war-winning donation of Leopard 2s and Abram tanks, but about a commitment to continue supplying the country with a steady stream of Western main battle tanks and other heavy equipment. But defeats like Mala Tokmachka highlight Ukraine's single and glaring vulnerability: its inability to provide air defense for frontline units. This is why Ukraine desperately needs F-16s from the West, and the lifting of the prohibition by President Biden is a good sign of things to come. Australia recently is rumored to donate as many as 40 F-18s as it transitions to F-35s, a significant donation that would have a very real impact in the ongoing war. While these aircraft will not be operating over Ukraine for a few months, one last thing to remember about the ongoing counteroffensive is that no matter how it shapes up, brilliant success or disastrous failure, it is not the end of the war. Both Russia and Ukraine have the manpower to continue fighting this war for years, even if they suffer catastrophic losses in the current fighting. This is why the best chance for a swift end to the war is one truly combined arms assault integrating ground and air power with Western equipment, shaping it into a plated fist that smashes deep into occupied territory and delivers demoralizing losses to the Russians. Ukrainian will to fight is high, yet as we've seen from the growing number of surrenders in just this first week of ground operations, Russia's own will to fight is tenuous at best. Russia knows this too, which is why it has once more instituted the use of blocking forces to shoot any retreating Russian soldiers. A video from Ukraine is alleging to show just such a series of executions, as Russian soldiers shoot their fleeing comrades, though there is some speculation that this might have been staged as a psychological attack on Russian morale. The use of the blocking forces themselves, though, is very real, and when you have to force your army to fight by pointing a gun at its back, it's not the best sign of great successes to come. The Soviets got away with it in World War II because Hitler was dumb and went against his commander's best military advice. Ukraine is proven to not be dumb and is being advised daily by senior military commanders from the most powerful military alliance in human history. Now, counterattack boredom and go check out Ukraine's plan to move the war inside Russia, or click this other video instead.